Hey guys, it is Lucid, and we've got a new series coming up on Bogarus, and I'm recording this Bogarus National Overview again for the third time. And it's not that I didn't like the previous two. Well, it's actually probably the fifth time, because I already have a Bogarus video up on YouTube, and I probably re-recorded for that once. So, yeah, but just from this, game, I am recording it now for a third time. And the reason I'm doing it, and the reason I wanted to do a whole new one from the original YouTube video that's up there, is I want to focus more on grand strategy for the National Overview. If you want to hear me talk about all the individual units, and in fact, if you're going to play Bogarus, I would totally recommend you listen to both videos. There will be a lot of things I say that are the same, but there will be some things that are different. And sometimes just clicking, talking about each of the mages and all the different things they can do, like listing them all off, it may help you kind of come up with an idea that may be helpful in your game. And talking about all the summons, go check that other video out if you want that. This is going to be more about grand strategy. What does that mean? It means if you already know what all the mages can do and you know which troops are good and which ones aren't, then you'll probably get more out of it. But if you're kind of newer, then you'll get less, right? Because you probably need to have me tell you, this mage can do this and this mage can do this and all of that stuff. So first, let's talk about Bogarus from a kind of 10,000 foot level. What is it? And then we'll switch into how do you win games and things like that. So at a 10,000 foot level, it is a nation with very good human mages. And it's a nation with very good human communion mages. I should add that. And it's a nation with kind of mediocre to lousy troops. So that's the big picture. The only paths we don't really get are we don't get water and we don't get nature. But everything else we can get, and we can tie into a communion to have an arbitrarily high level of in combat. And we have some mages which are basically going to need to be in communions to be useful, like the Occultist. These guys are going to be shit on their own. However, in a communion, they are monsters. And we're going to have other mages which can be in communions, like the Astropologist, but they can also be pretty good solo operators with Air 2. So lots of different things that can all happen. Yeah. Now, the other thing to kind of... We've talked about the magic diversity a bit. And we're not going to talk about all the troops in the roster. One thing I'll just say at the beginning while I have you here is the Mali and Drazina are who you're going to use for expansion. There's really nothing else in the Bogarus lineup that's going to be able to expand nearly as well. So that's kind of a thing. The other troops, we'll talk about them very, very, very fast, but they're mostly kind of different varieties of stinking hot garbage. And this guide actually is going to be a bit different than other guides, even probably than my previous one, in that other guides you'll see, okay, you need to take an expander with Bogarus, or the nation's weak early, or you're a rush target. And I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. I think you can actually be really strong early, and you can be the one rushing somebody else. And certainly if you have good diplomacy. If you're getting 2v1, you don't want to be rushing somebody else. You want to be defending yourself. So, yeah. Now, next I want to talk about how you win as Bogarus, and then we'll go talk about all the units, because that will kind of, connect the dots. So the way I think you win as Bogarus, you have you're a nation which is going to scale pretty well. You're certainly not on the clock to win early. There are some problems you have in the late game, you're a human nation, so you can get nuked by flames from the sky and stuff like that. But your stuff is pretty expendable, so you're in a position to not necessarily care that much. There's a few ways you win. One way is you are a blood nation. Now, being a blood nation in the late age is not very special. Many, many, many nations are blood nations in the late age. So there's nothing super special about that. But you can do it probably on average better than most. You're certainly not the best blood power, but late age Zabalba would be better. But you're better than most. You're better than most. You have recruit anywhere blood mages, so you're not relying on your capital or anything. They're reasonably cheap. It's not like you're using a Van Jarl or something to blood hunt. But Yeah, they're not like the cheapest or the best. And, you also have these guys too, which, can be important for if you're trying to do like Fiends of Darkness or something, which are one of the things you want to look at maybe as a potential summon in the late game if you have a lot of blood slaves to spend. But, you don't have national blood magic. Like, you don't have murder kitties from, like Mictlan or Zabalba. You don't have, like Late Age Marignon, they get the Fallen Angels, which are pretty intense. We don't get those. But we, if you want to have a good playthrough where you're just using generic blood magic, these guys are pretty good at that. So that's one way. You're a blood power. Number 2 way to win is you have better magic, like reliable magic access than almost any other nation in the game. And what I mean by that is a lot of other nations can get like if you look at Arco in the late age, or you look at, I'm trying to think, like Joman in the late age, they get really good magic diversity, but a lot of it is randoms. Like a lot of it is they'll have an Astral Mage that can roll a bunch of randoms. And that actually ends up making a pretty, sure, if you want to get a key battlefield buff up, they are going to be able to do that just about as well as Bogarus will. What they're not going to be able to do is they're not going to be able to put together cohesive mage cores nearly as well. And what do I mean by that? I mean, having all the same paths on the slaves as they do on the masters, or things like that. So that basically they're going to have a lot of off-path casting when they do communions, and that's going to mean they can have much less powerful communions. Bogarus is going to be able to do very, very powerful communions. And I'll spend a lot of time talking about that. I think I'm going to try to focus on the mages, not as like an individual mage, but as like a whole mage lineup, and how you think about them. If you want to hear me talk more about the individual mages, go check out the other video. But yeah, Bogarus, I think, has the ability to do a wide variety of things with their mages, in a highly reliable and powerful way compared to any other nation in the game. That's one of their things. So, what that means and how it's going to translate to you winning a game is you are going to be able to buff up more armies than other nations will, because you're going to have all these reliable paths for whatever you want to cast. You're going to have more powerful kind of mage artillery in combat than most nations. And that's a pretty big advantage. The problem, of course, for this nation, though, is it's a human nation with sort of garbage troops, and we'll come back to how do we address that weakness. And the final way you can win with Bogarus is they have a summon. It's a Firebird, and you need to be Fire Astral to cast the spell to summon them, and it's 2 Fire Gems to summon 1 Firebird. And Alchemists can summon them because they have the Fire Astral. So can the Staretza, but you're probably going to use the Alchemists. And this is important because Firebirds have a Bringer of Fortune 2, which means you have a 2% chance or a 1 in 50 chance per Firebird to have a good positive event, which doesn't sound like much, but it's independent of the game event system. So normally the game event system, I think it caps out at 5. You can only have 5 events, but if you have enough Firebirds, you can have a lot of events. I don't know if there's a cap at all, but it's way more than 5. So yeah, you can get just an enormous number of events from Firebirds, but you need a lot of them, so you're going to need to pour a lot of Fire Gems into it. So it's not, and it's not going to, one way to look at it is it's not going to pay you back in Fire Gems, probably even that game. It's going to take a long time for one Firebird to pay itself back to you in Fire Gems. But what it can do is it can pay you back in other gem types, especially if you have magic and luck scales, because you're going to get a lot of magic events. And it can pay you back in gold. So it's a way to turn Fire Gems into other gems and to turn Fire Gems into other gold, or into gold, but kind of slowly. It's not like a rapid payback thing. However, there are not many mechanics and dominions that allow you to scale your economy without conquering new land or controlling a global spot. And the problem with controlling a global spot is that people will fight you for it. They'll overcast you, or, your spell can get dispelled. And the problem with controlling land is people, to get more land, you have to go piss somebody off and fight with them. And so this is kind of a sit in your base and turtle mechanic that can be pretty powerful if it scales a lot. So that is kind of the third big picture way to win as Bogarus. Now, the downside of Bogarus is that they have a lousy troop roster. And this I've said before, other people have said, and that tends to make them kind of a rush target. I don't actually think they're a rush target. And I will tell you why. The main reason why is Malia Druzina are not bad. They're significantly better than Heavy Cav. Like, if you look at Indie Heavy Cav, they are, I think, defense 12 and usually protection 15 or something like that. And then hit points is 10, and then attack skill is 10. Like, it's not nearly as good. They're 10 gold cheaper, though. And these guys really can hold their own. They're going to be able to expand great. They're going to be able to, as long as they're not supremely outnumbered, they'll be able to whoop up on Heavy Cav. They're going to be great in your first war. They're just all around a very good troop. You know, they have problems, though. The problems are they're expensive and they have a lot of upkeep. You know, the upkeep, like some mages cost less upkeep a year than your Malia Druzina. So, yeah, they're expensive. I'm pretty sure the little Astral 1 sacred dudes from Bandarlog or whatever cost less upkeep than these guys. So anyway, they're expensive. They are very pricey. There's roles for some of these other things in your roster, and I'll talk about the ones that I can think of roles for. And everything else is garbage. These Peshti are not going to be very capable fighting. They're kind of hot, stinking garbage. These guys hit kind of hard at 18, and these guys, you know, they have piercing damage, and they're not, you know, they can repel a little bit, or maybe they won't be repelled. They also have a little bit better defense than these guys. These guys, I think, have the best defense, but they're also, I think, 1 more gold than the other dudes. But they have a castle defense bonus, which doesn't actually matter. And what, 11 attack on the swordsman? These guys are 10. I don't know. Who knows? These are mostly the same. In some situations, one will be slightly better than another. I tend to prefer the spearmen. But, you know, there's a case to be made the others are better too. Anyway, mostly these are garbage. However, you know, they have a shield, so they're not going to immediately die to archers. And this is an era with a lot of crossbow fire, and all of these have shields. And they have some armor, so they're not going to, like, immediately die, mostly. That's important, but they're probably not going to win any melee fights, which means, ultimately, given enough turns, they will die. However, if you need people to guard mages, like on Guard Commander, or you need, you know, somebody to just stand there in a line and not die, hopefully, before your mages or archers or something kill somebody, these will do an okay job. But generally, if you want your troops to kill things, the Malia Druzina are going to do a lot better. They have a lot higher defense. They have much better protection. They have a much higher attack sword. And they have a big lance charge. They just are going to do a lot better in actual melee combat than any of your Peshti. And if you're going to buff things up, it's probably better to buff up Malia Druzina rather than waste mage turns trying to buff up these guys. Though, you know, potentially as the game goes much later, that could kind of shift a little bit. But later in the game, if you're making too many human troops later in the game, you're probably in trouble. A lot of human nations want to shift away from summoning human troops or from recruiting human troops as the game goes really late. You want to get to different kinds of summons. Bogarus is certainly not an exception there. So anyway, it's something you're going to look to transition away from, but there's roles for these guys in the game. They're just not very good, but they have a job they can do. And basically, that is be a body that doesn't immediately die somewhere and maybe occasionally hit something. You have other things which will basically just die and run away immediately that you should just avoid, unless you just purely need siege chaff. The other unit... there's a few other units we'll talk about which are worth mentioning, and one is the Void Archer. So these have snow move, they're map move 12, which means snow move, map move 12, and 2 planes in the cold. They're going to be able to move 2 provinces. So that's fine. They're not very special, right? They have short bows in the age of crossbows. they're really not very good, but what they are is they're cheap. They are dirt cheap in terms of resources and recruitment points. And yeah, I mean, they're basically like a militia archer is a way to think about them. But you can mass them very, very quickly. And you're playing a nation that has very good air access, these guys, and very good fire access, these guys. And so you can trivially do wind guide, flaming arrows, arrow fend, all of that stuff. And so you've got archer game that actually is pretty good, unless people are packing fire resistance, in which case the flaming arrows part won't do anything, and then you're just left with crappy little arrows, and that's going to make you pretty sad. But early game and early mid game, usually there's windows where archers are useful, and you can use these guys. And while we're talking about archers, I've been talking about crossbows and saying you're in age of crossbows and saying we don't have them, we just have crappy little short bows. But that's a big fat lie. You have crossbows. Everybody has crossbows in late age. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And that's because one of the things that sucks about expanding is you have to expand into a bunch of crossbows. But what that also means is once you build a fort there, or if you have good scales, you can usually foreign recruit crossbows there yourself. One thing to note about that is there's many different kinds of crossbows that are indies. Like not all indie crossbows are the same, and some have really good armor, which you would think is a good thing, but it's actually bad because it makes them take a lot of resources, so you can't mass them very well. If you want to mass those, you're probably going to have to build a fort on that province. There's other kinds that take very few resources, and you can mass them very quickly, and those are very good. So you just have to imagine, you have to visualize that you have a 10 gold crossbow unit on your roster, but you can't recruit it in every place. You can only recruit it in certain places. And it's possible the game can screw you and you don't get any crossbows, but it's highly, highly, highly unlikely, unless you really failed an expansion and you had really bad luck. So yeah, that is the archers. And the crossbows are going to benefit from all of the air and the fire magic that I was talking about, except even more. Now, the last few units we need to talk about, we'll talk about this one because we were talking about archers. This is a recruit anywhere horse archer, and it gets a composite bow, so it's better than the short bow in a sense. But I would probably rather have two. It's actually a little more than two, because two short bows are actually only going to cost 16 gold. But yeah, I'd probably in most cases rather have two short bows rather than one composite bow. However, these guys have better morale. They're going to be a lot faster to move around on the strategic map, and they have a mace attack and decent armor, so they're not going to immediately die. And they're foreign recruits, so you can get these guys everywhere. Now, if you've been picking up what I've been putting out, basically the summary is we have Malia Druzina, which are good. We have these guys, which have situational kind of marginal roles. We have these guys who we can spam out of our forts at like alarming numbers. And we are going to be getting a lot of indie crossbows. So we have a lot of foreign recruit things. We have these horses and we have the indie crossbows, which we should be getting a lot of. We're going to be getting Malia Druzina mostly out of our forts, but on occasion we'll be getting Void archers. Now, if you do a scales build, which is what I'm going to be advocating here, if you do a scales build, it is extremely important that you do not put yourself in a greedy mindset for play. You cannot both do a greedy build and a greedy playstyle. Right, so if you do a greedy build, like you go scales, you can't be like, well, I just hope nobody attacks me. Oh, I mean, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it. I hope nobody attacks me so that I can sit here and build my 4 forts, and then I'll get my mage core, and if that's worked and I've, hoodwinked everybody in diplomacy, then, it'll be great. That's a pretty bad way, I think, to play. I would always recommend preparing for a first war. And then if you do that, if you prepare for a first war and you build a big army, there's a good chance you're going to want to use it, so you'll be in a first war anyway. But if you do a scales build, you should be maxing out indie crossbow production every turn, and you should be maxing out recruitment in your forts. Like, you don't build a fort and only build mages at the beginning of the game. That is a very greedy thing to do with scales. If you're going scales, you make a shit ton of troops. Because I can just tell you, for the most part, your troops are not going to trade good 1-to-1, and they're not even going to trade good, like, gold for gold with anything they're going to be fighting. Okay, you're going to be at a disadvantage in terms of quality, and so you need to make up for that with quality. I mean, oh god, I can't talk. You're going to be at a disadvantage in terms of quality, and you need to make up for that with quantity. Right? So we need a lot of garbage. Those are the troops. Okay, there's one more. It's this guy, the Callisti. I wanted to avoid them. I didn't want to mention them. But the Callisti are a bunch of sacred, self-flagellating dudes. They carry a big mace. Yeah, they're religious zealots. You can get them everywhere. There's a few things that make them good and a lot of things that make them bad. The things that make them bad are they have less than human hit points, they have less than human strength, they have less than human attack, they have less than human defense, they have 0 protection, and they have not very good morale. Things that make them good. They are very cheap in resources. They are very cheap in recruitment points. They are sacred. They have a tiny bit of cold resistance. They're stealthy. This also makes them bad, by the way. They cause unrest. Most part, it's bad. If you're running around in enemy territory, it's not quite as bad. Is it possible to take a Hellblast where these guys become viable? I don't honestly think so. You can maybe take a bless, because I've played with this. You can maybe, like I was like, what kind of bless would it take to get these guys where I could have a squad of 30, which could conquer an indie province with 15 PD with not taking much losses? You know, like maybe only losing 1 Callisti. And the short answer is I haven't found it yet. And it's not to say it doesn't exist. Because there's a lot of different bless combinations and whatnot. I just don't know what it is. These guys are garbage. Like, just to make these guys like a normal human medium infantry, you have to do a ton. Like, you need to give them an attack bless. You need to give them 2 defense blesses. You need to give them a protection bonus. And once you've done all that, which by the way is not super cheap, they're just like a normal medium infantry, or like they would be the worst infantry troop in the era once you've done that, right? Now, that's not being very creative. We could maybe do more, like maybe you do a shock body something, or a charge body something, or maybe you do twist fate on them and you don't care about the first protection hit, or maybe you do blood vengeance and then you want them to die. Or maybe you get really creative and you say, okay, we're just going to use them for death explosion and run them in front of the enemy. I mean, those are things that maybe would make sense. Like maybe death explosion Callisti is a thing. I don't actually think that's a terribly bad idea. I think that's something you could build around, and that would give these guys a use. But if you want them to be like good sacreds you're going to mass and use in combat, I don't think there's a way to do it. I think they're too hard to use. There's a few roles that I kind of already mentioned a couple of them that I think these guys can fill. One of the ways you win with this nation is by getting Firebirds, and you can potentially get them early. I didn't mention this in the national, like the very upfront part, but this is a nation that researches really well. And you can rush Enchantment 6 and get Eternal Pyre. And with Eternal Pyre, to get Eternal Pyre, you're going to want fire on your god. So you'd probably take like a dormant researcher, like a fire mage or something, and then get him up to fire 6, and that way as soon as enchantment's done, boop, you cast it. So if you do that, I'll show you what that would look like. You would get this guy, you would go up to 6, you would go dormant, you would take as good a scales as you can. Honestly, with this, I would probably go, if you're gonna go this hard into Firebirds, I would probably recommend that you go like Heat 1, and this will keep you from getting your Firebirds nuked with Murdering Winter. Yeah, and also there's a lot of other nations which benefit more from cold in the late age than you do. So going Heat 1 is definitely an option. And then you'd probably go Growth, and then you don't actually need magic scales. It's nice to have because it's a blood nation. But all your blood mages actually can communion up normally, so you actually really don't need... you probably want luck, though. So I don't know, you could do something... Oh wait, no, we're dormant, so we actually have a lot more design points. Go neutral. You could go something like this, all right? And... Oh, we actually have 1 point left, so I guess we'll do that. So anyway, you could do something like this, and that will be fine. That will be just fine. And then you have Callisti, which you can use as little kamikaze dudes, which can be pretty funny. Though it may be, if you're doing this, you may want to give them a bit of fire resistance, because they will blow each other up. And by the way, this is not enough fire resistance, fire protection 5. You would need at least this. And even then, I think, yeah, this would maybe kind of work. But if you have a big blob, I'm pretty sure this would still reach critical mass and they would all blow the whole thing up. But if you had like packs or 2 or 3 together, they wouldn't necessarily blow each other up. And if they blow each other up, that's their job too. But you only want them blowing up when they're next to the enemy, not when they're in a big blob. Anyway, but then you've now put a ton into fire you don't really need to do. So anyway, you could do this if you want to and have another scale, but then you're going to have to make a fire hat, so you'll have to make a slight detour into construction, or you could go 6, and then you can put it up like as fast as possible. And yeah, and then you just have to be careful and space your guys out. Problems doing this are you do have a few sacred mages, like you have Staretza, and then you have your Eparchs, which we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to. And if they die with Death Explosion and you're not planning on it, it can cause you just enormous harm. So that's a funny thing. The other thing you can kind of do if you're wanting to do like a weird bless is you can take the Blood Fountain. You can go, probably for this, you're going to want to go Imprisoned, and you can do Blood Vengeance. And then you take your Callisti and you put them on Guard Commander or something. And then if they're doing like evocations or stuff that are maybe going to target mages and they hit Callisti, you will blow up enemy mages and it will be great. Anyway, with this, you're obviously going to have a lot better scales you can potentially take. So you could go Cold 3 or Heat 1, depending on how you'd want to do it. Here, we're not really focusing our strategy on Firebirds, but anyway, you could do something like this. And you're going to have really good scales. And you have Callisti that you can use as basically little Blood Vengeance things. So that's great. And this gives you a pretty good smite. It gives you Claim Life, which is really nice. I think this is totally a viable build you could do. And this is in some ways the best of the smites, because it does 20 damage rather than 10 like most smites do. It has probably a not as good secondary effect that, you know, if you fail an MR check, you take the chest wound. And like other things will have like Astral, which is another one I like because it's 100 precision and it's 100 range, so you can hit people across the battlefield. That's only 10 damage. And if you take that 10 damage check and then fail a second morale check, a second MR check, then you can get paralyzed. But, you know, your odds of failing both are kind of small. This, in some ways, is probably the best one, though it depends. It depends. The Astral is real nice, like, too, if you're getting gem baited or something's attacking you. Just hitting it turn 1, not giving a thug any chance to buff up or something like that can be really nice. Anyway, this is another thing you can do. But the reason I'm showing you that now is those are different things you can do. I think, in my opinion, those are the only really 2 interesting things you can do with Callisti, are basically have different ways where you can capitalize on them dying. Because that's the only thing these guys are any fucking good for that I found out. Now, I always want to be careful when I say something won't work, because I can tell you with a degree of confidence that something is probably okay. You know, but I haven't tested everything, so I can't tell you with a lot of confidence that nothing else will work, or that, you know, things won't work. Like I haven't figured it out, and I've kind of tried. But some of you can maybe figure out a good way to use Callisti, and maybe you're making 10 of these out of every fort, and somehow it's overpowered and imbalanced, and you know, people petition Illwinter to nerf the Callisti. I can't figure out what that is. Okay, so we've covered all the units. I guess to completely cover all the units, we'll talk about the summons real quick. I mentioned the Firebird already. 2 fire gems gets you the Bringer of Fortune 2 guy. Those are pretty nice. The second one that's important are the Smeargles, and basically it's a Conjuration 2 spell. So here's the Firebird, right? 2 fire gems, you get a Firebird. The Smeargle, or however you say it, is 1 air gem, and it gives you a guy with 10 patrol strength. These are really great for getting your blood economy going. They're great patrollers. They're not undisciplined, so they'll guard commander, or they can retreat, or whatever you want them to. So in many ways, they're like a lot better than wolves or what have you. They're pretty nice. I totally dig Smeargles. And yeah, these are the only 2. There's a bunch, and I'm not saying they're all bad, but in my opinion, these are the ones that you're probably going to want to use in every game to some degree. And all the rest of them are pretty situational. They're pretty situational, I would suggest. That said, you will probably find a way, if you want to use any of them in a game if you're really looking for good opportunities. They're pretty decent summons, but I don't think any of them are just ridiculously efficient. So anyway, that is the talk about the summons, which is, I go through each of these in the other video if you want to hear me talk about each of the summons. We pull them up and talk about them. And they're pretty cool. For the commanders, okay, so for the commanders, we've got basically this guy who's really cheap. Like if you compare him to an indie commander, for 30 gold, you get 50% more leadership than a normal commander. So they're pretty nice. And they can snow move. And so if you're leading your infantry around, like not your foot dudes, but either your archers or your Peshti, these guys are actually going to be faster than your Cav commanders. These guys are technically faster, but what will happen is it's going to register the slowest unit in their army is these humans. And so it's going to say, okay, you only have 14 map move. And then it's going to say, okay, your commander doesn't have snow move. And so it's going to give you 14 non-snow move. If you want to move fast in snow, you actually need these guys with these dudes, and they will be able to move 12, because that's the movement speed of these guys. Oh no, they're 14. Are these guys 12? These guys are 12. I think 12 is still enough to get 2 map move and friendly. But anyway, you'll be able to move 12 or 14 depending what you're toting around in the snow with these dudes, leading them. So they're pretty good commanders. The other important commander is this dude. He has Inspirational 1 and is going to give a bonus of 2 to squads. And some of your squads don't have great morale. And also, since your troops aren't great, they're going to want to run. Because generally, if you're not great, you're not going to kill things. They're going to be killing you. That's going to cause your morale to go down. And eventually, you'll run. So it is good to have good leadership on Bogarus. You don't want to be running around with bad morale, especially if you're attacking somebody. You're an enemy dominion, so you're getting the morale penalty. Stacking up morale can be really nice. I highly recommend if you're doing a big army, go ahead and, bite the bullet. Don't get a mage for whatever turn and get one of these guys to lead your armies around. Very nice. This is like a middle ground guy. I don't think there's much room for him because you're not going to want to use these guys. You can use indie commanders or something to lead your other troops around like in small squads. It's really once you group them up for like a big committed attack, you're going to really want that morale. Again, just my opinion. The Scopets, these guys theoretically would lead your Callisti around in stealthy raiding squads. However, it is almost impossible unless your opponent is really bad and they're not putting PD anywhere. For you to lose fewer gold in Callisti than you were gaining in income from the province you're taking. But anyway, these guys have a theoretical purpose. You may also, I'm not saying you should do this, but possibly you could thug these guys if you have some silly bless and then buff them. I don't know. It's probably a bad idea. Next, you have the Exarch. These guys are actually kind of important because we can do... they're going to be great at controlling Dominion, right? We can preach in our forts, get it up to Dominion Strength 5 if we have a temple present. That's basically the main job of these guys. They can also do Sermon of Courage, which can be nice. And then while we're on the topic of priests, we have the Eparchs. And so now we're going to go on our little Eparch detour. There's not a ton of nations that get recruitable Holy Threes. It's a kind of small list. And the number of nations that get Holy Threes, where that is their only path, is an even smaller list. And a lot of the things which are Holy 3 are 4 commander points, so they're slow to recruit. These guys are not slow to recruit. You can get a lot of these guys early, and that's pretty significant. You can get just a boatload of Holy 3s, and Smite is actually a pretty good spell. One of the reasons Smite is good is because most of the holy spells only take 5 fatigue to cast. And so like a normal mage, like let's say you were to compare Smite and Lightning Bolt, they do about the same damage, except Smite can be resisted with MR. So you're like, okay, Smite's not as good. Lightning Bolt's much better. But the mage casting Lightning Bolt is going to fatigue out reasonably quickly. He'll probably be fatigued out after, 6 or 7 rounds, depending. Because, he's got his own encumbrance. He's got the fatigue from the spell. He's going to fatigue out super fast. Eparchs fatigue out real slow. Oftentimes, they won't even take their first nap until like 15, maybe 20 turns into combat, especially if you have relief up. These guys just go and go and go and go. So they don't have as much maybe burst damage right up front, but they just pound and pound and pound and pound and pound. So I'm actually a fan of these guys. The other thing that's really nice is they can help with expansion, because that is an area like your early game with your troops being kind of garbage. It's an area you can kind of struggle with, especially before you have your cap circle cleared where you're not making a ton of Malia Druzina. These guys really help you get the ball rolling. And a lot of times what you'll find if you have 2 of these guys in an expansion party, they will get as many kills as the rest of your army. And what that means is it means your combats are shorter, the enemy routes faster, so you take less attrition, so you're able to expand better, etc. Because I've come back and record this after playing some of the game, you'll see we end up using these guys and pull off some pretty cool stuff in expansion with them that I didn't even plan on doing before the game. It was just like the situation called for ingenuity, and we were like, okay, we are up to the challenge. So yeah, that's the Eparch. The other thing that I should mention about them is being Holy 3 is really nice for controlling Dominion. It's really hard to preach down enemy Dominion, even if you're only Holy 2. You know, like 5 candles can be really slow to preach out if you're Holy 2. But if you're Holy 3, it makes a world of difference getting rid of enemy candles. So these guys are going to be able to get rid of enemy candles. And also, they can preach your candles regardless of your Dominion score, because we're actually going to go a low Dominion score. They can preach your candles, like even if you went Dom Strength 2, you can preach your candles up to all the way to like 7 in a temple and a fort, even if that your max Dom Strength is 2. Preaching is independent of temple checks. Temple checks are going to be capped by your Dom Strength. Preaching is independent. So anyway, these guys are going to do a great job controlling your Dominion, which is something I value, having the option to do. You know, especially if you have good scales, you need to get your scales in your provinces to take advantage of it, and these guys are great doing it. And if you're attacking an enemy, and especially if they're going to be attacking into you and you have a bunch of Eparchs there, you can preach the Dominion up, and then you'll be fighting in your Dominion, which you might be like, okay, well, why does that matter? Well, it can be a 2 morale swing. Like, your troops are going to go from minus 1 morale to plus 1 morale, so it's a 2 morale swing. And in addition to that, as if that weren't good enough, the enemy troops are going to get a 2 morale swing. They're going to go from plus 1 morale to minus 1. And that can totally swing the outcome of a fight, right? Your guys having 2 higher and the enemy having 2 less, which means if you're basically trading about the same, the enemy is going to run. Whereas before, you would have been the one that runs. And so that can be a pretty significant factor in combat. And it can also affect weird little fidgety things with repel rolls and stuff that looks at morale. So anyway, that is the Eparch. I am going... Now, don't think that you need to make Eparchs early with Bogarus, all right? If you make Eparchs early with Bogarus, it will significantly impact your research and your early timings on different things. However, we are going to, in this playthrough, we are going to be making a fair amount. We're not going to be going completely hog wild, but we're going to be making a lot of Eparchs, all right? We will stop making them at a point. The reason why I will personally advocate for it, though I don't know enough to suggest it's optimal, right? But the reason I will advocate it with my, the ignorance I just have, because I haven't really played this nation that many times, and by that many times I mean it all, is that they do help in expansion. And having a very nice expansion is pretty important for having a good early mid-game. And so they help with expansion, and they're going to be more useful than mages in a very early rush war, almost always. Almost always. And the problem if you have mages is you don't want to bring them out of the lab, so they're usually not going to be in position for like the important border fight. These guys are going to be out fighting, and you just said, fuck it, I don't care. We're not researching for the first 8 turns, right? There's some caveats to this. Like, once you get Conjuration 5 or something, your mages can do a lot more in a very important fight than an Eparch can. But Conjuration 5 is a bit of a ways off. You can rush it really fast if all you make is Master of Names out of your capital. But anyway, in my opinion, in general, if you plan on fighting early, or you plan on getting rushed, or you want to plan on getting rushed, having a lot of these guys, for like just making these guys for the first 7 or 8 turns is a pretty good idea. And like I said, they're 2 recruitment points. You have a citadel, so you can actually make 1.5 of these guys a turn. It's pretty nice. Those are the Eparchs. They are cap only, though. Now, for the mages, we have some things to talk about. We're going to go through them all. But first, I want to talk about conceptually how you think about them. One of the problems that you will have to deal with playing Bogarus is you can go in so many different directions, right? You have, if we look at it, Astral, Death, Blood. That's Astral. Air. Fire and Earth. And that's basically all the paths we're going to get. I think these guys are just repeats. But basically all the paths except Nature and... one second. All right. Sorry about that. So, yeah, you're going to have a lot of different things you can do. You're going to have all the different paths. You're going to have potentially all the different mages. And you can research a bunch of different things. And one problem is if you have a big army that's a big cluster of all these mages, it's actually not very efficient. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you're going to be burning out your communions. You can't have a very strong master to slave ratio. And if you have too many mages in total in the communion, it'll burn out anyway. So, yeah, it's a thing, right? Like, if you go and you're like, okay, well, we have, 5 Astropologists, and we have 8 Occultists, and we have 4 Calendologists, and we have 3 Alchemists, and we're going to put them all in an army and tie them into a communion, it's going to be very inefficient. All right. Not to say you can't do it. Sometimes you just have to bring what you have. What I would like to suggest to you as the way to use this nation is your mages are going to, some of your mages are going to be efficient solo operators, and they can exist in an army with a communion, but they don't need to be part of it. And there's 2 mages that fall into that role, maybe 3 if you look at your cat mage, or 4 if you look at the Five-fold Angel. But basically you have Calendologists. These guys, once you get Light of the Northern Star up, they're going to be Astral 3, and they can just do Soul Slay. If you want to, you can do Power of the Spheres, and they can do Enslaved Mind. And then you get the Astropologist, who can do Storm Power, and they, especially if Light of the Northern Star is up, they can cast Power of the Spheres without too much, and they can be Air 4 as independent mages. All right. Now, you can also, by the way, I don't think you would want to do it for the Calendologist, but for the Astropologist, you could have a huge Astropologist communion where you wire these guys all together. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. But what I think is a bit of a bad idea is having a big cluster of dudes where you have slaves of multiple types and masters of multiple types in large quantity. A lot of your other mages, we'll start with the Occultist. You can have very top-heavy communions of just pure Occultists, right? So let's say you only have Occultists. You could probably have 4 masters easily supporting 10 4 slaves easily supporting 10 masters. And it will go it might eventually burn out, but especially if you're doing things like reinvigoration and stuff at the end of your script, it will go a very long time before it burns out. And you can throw into that mix, you can add onto it 1 Alchemist, and he can do any of the earth or fire buffs you need, including summon earth power, which will give reinvigoration to your communion, which will be great for you. It'll be great. Yeah, so that is the Occultist. This guy needs to work within a communion. He's going to be very hard to use outside of one, which is different than the Calendologist and the Astropologist. But basically, whenever you're putting an army together, how I would suggest you think about it is you need to figure out what is the mage that is going to be the base of your communion, right? So it can either be an Occultist, or it can be an Astropologist, or it can be an Alchemist. These, in my opinion, are the things you do as the base. And what do I mean by the base? I mean, that's going to be your communion slaves, and it's going to be the vast majority of your communion masters. And the communion masters off script are going to be casting, like Horde of Skeletons or Thunderstrike, or Gifts of Heaven or Magma Eruption or whatever it is you have them scripted to cast, or whatever they want to cast off script. They'll be doing that. You're going to have other odds and ends that are tied in to the communion to just get an important buff off. And, depending on how you have your communion set up and all of that, you may decide to give them a bow so that they fire the bow at the end instead of when they go off script at the end, casting spells and burning your communion out. But because it's only like 1 or 2 guys in the communion, you also could just have them cast spells at the end, and it's just going to be one off-path mage with because maybe this is a really big army, you have 8 communion slaves. It's not going to make that big of a difference, all right? It's not going to be that big of a deal. Yeah, so that I think is the way to think about it, the thing that's kind of interesting about this, though, is you end up having to make a lot of decisions ahead of time, because you can't get 20 occultists in a fort like this. You're going to have to do this way ahead of time, right? So if you have multiple forts near each other, you could have them making different mages or something like that. You could build up an armada of Astropologists and an armada of occultists and decide which one's going to go in which army. But what I would suggest you need to do is you need to think, okay, the mages I'm going to build on this war front, on this border with this neighbor, even if you're not going to war with them, right, are going to be mages that would be good in a fight with them. And that should be based off of the research you're planning, and the research you're planning should be based off the mages you're producing, so you find some synergy there. But, it should be based off the research you're doing and the national matchup for whichever neighbor it is. So there's some kind of weird long-range planning you need to do to figure out what is the mage core I'm going to have and what is it going to be. But yeah, I think that's the main thing. So I can't tell you all the things these mages should be doing because they should be doing everything. But I'll tell you some of the things, right? So this obviously is first and foremost, it's going to be just a beast of a Skelly Spam Communion Mage. You don't have to rely on a Sabbath to get in. You just Communion in. You spam Horde of Skeletons out. You can do Reinvigoration when you want to. One thing you're going to want to do in basically all of these communions is you're going to want to have one of the masters cast Power of the Spheres, and it's going to make all the slaves a higher path than the master, and then they're going to get a fatigue reduction, a significant fatigue reduction. And so that will be part of how you have really high master to slave ratios. Anyway, that is the Occultist. They can also do things like Sin Lesser Horror, though we'll be probably preferentially using our Staretza for that, and our Master of Names, but that is something else they can do. We'll talk about some of the cheesier, kind of crazier things we can do with these guys too, which is these guys can do... There's this thing called the Horror Bomb, which is where you do Hell Power and you wait for a bunch of horrors to respawn around you, and then everything dies, and then the horrors go kill the enemy army. I don't really know what I want to call it, but there's the... what should we call it? I have no idea. But basically, it's a better horror bomb. And use these guys, instead of really relying on Hell Power to do most of the horror summoning, you're going to summon them manually. You just do the Call Horror spell. And once you've summoned a bunch of them, you do Vortex of Returning, and you piece your whole army out. And you're like, what now? And now the enemy army has to fight 10 or 12 horrors, which is very hard to fight. You will find out. So anyway, that is another thing these guys can do. They can also probably do other... look, every spell... I could sit here and think about every single spell they can do, right? And we're not going to have time for that. The Calendologist, these guys are kind of interesting, because like I said, when you put them in a battle and then you have Light of the Northern Star up there, Astral 3, so they can just spam Soul Slay. And then if they do Power of the Spheres, they can do Enslaved Mind. They also are probably going to be, if you're going to be magic dueling, you probably want to do it with these guys, because you're going to get a little bit of bang for your buck, because they're Astral 2 instead of Astral 1. And they're also Fortune Teller 10, which can be pretty nice. If you run Misfortune especially. But they're also good if you run Luck, because you'll have more events. I don't know. It's just nice to have Fortune Teller. But the problem with these is I think, especially in the early game, which is kind of the time when you care more about events, you're probably not going to want them. You're probably going to want the other mages a lot more. It's time, I think, we talk about the Master of Names, because in the early game, you're going to be wanting to balance getting these guys who are going to be your best way to turn fort turns into research. And they're also, I think, going to be your most, though it might depend a little bit. I think if you take magic scales, your other research mages are going to be a lot closer competition for them. If you take drain scales, these are by far and away your best researcher. If you take magic scales, your other mages are great because these guys cost a bit more upkeep. Your other guys in Magic are going to be just about as good per upkeep dollar of research, but these guys are going to give you more per fort turn. And you'll have to balance making these guys, who are going to come in a few varieties, fire, air, and blood, with making your other mages, which are going to be more reliable paths and will probably be more useful in combat for your first war. But these are going to research faster. So it's a bit of a decision. I usually don't like to focus on research monkeys. However, these are all actually pretty useful too, because you can jump into a communion and be a fire mage, or you can jump into a communion and be an air mage. And most of the time, there's useful things you can find to do in that. The problem though is the other people in your communion may not be the same path as you, because like the same guy, like let's say you got all alchemists. Okay, well, you could have these guys jump in as a fire mage, but the air mages, when they would jump in, would be off path, right? So that's a bit of a kind of complexity there. But they just research so damn fast, you're going to want some of them. So the question is, like, how do you balance that with having the other kinds of mages you want? But that's the thing, you're almost certainly going to want some of these. These guys I dig. Coming back, we have the Astropologist. Now, I had mentioned before already kind of how you can do Storm Power and Power of the Spheres, get them up to be real high. You can also just wire them in communions. They're really strong. They can also Cloud Trapeze. That's super important. So that you have magic phase movement on these guys. They can jump into any fort you have and potentially defend it against the dishonorable enemy hordes. They can cast Thunderstrike with all they have to do is be Air 3 to do Thunderstrike with Summon Storm Power in a storm. And if you don't have a storm up, you can just do Power of the Spheres. It will knock their ass out because it's going to be 100 fatigue for that, unless you have Light of the Northern Star up, in which case it will only be 50. And I don't know, if you put 2 pros on it, you might be able to get it down to only like 30 fatigue or something. So they can do all that. The other thing they can do is air elementals, which are going to be pretty critical for like an early war. So they're really good. They can do all your air buffs. They're just a great unit. They're really, really good. I like them. I was kind of thinking about it too while I was just thinking like maybe there's a way to thug them too, because they can also do a mirror image, which normally wouldn't be good, but in air too, especially in a storm, you could get their mirror image up pretty high. A really high mirror image is pretty strong, and then maybe stack gear on them. And then like twist fate or something on them. I bet you they could actually be, and you'd probably have to stack attack gear because they have really bad combat stats, but they could maybe thug. And if you're new to the game, don't try. This would be like really weird, fidgety things to get it to work because they have really bad combat stats. But I could totally see it working in like certain special cases. And then the Alchemist, this guy's pretty special, so he's going to be... I kind of mentioned the things this guy can do in the early mid-game. This guy is actually, in some ways, like your best early mid-game guy. He's going to be able to do Strength of Giants when you tie him into a communion. He's going to be able to do Legions of Steel when you tie him into a communion. He's going to be able to do Flaming Arrows. He's going to be able to do Fire or Earth Elementals, depending on what you need. He is just super duper strong early. Now, all those things are going to take gems, compared to the Occultist, who can summon skeletons mostly for free. But, these are... Fire and Earth Elementals are really strong. So... and Strength of Giants is really good. And Legion of Steel is really good. So yeah, this guy is excellent. Absolutely excellent. He's old. and it's probably time we talk about which of your mages are old or not. The Occultist is old, and the Alchemist is old, which is kind of interesting when you look at it. These are the mages too, which are like they're primarily communion only. You can do some in Phoenix Power and some in Firepower with these guys, and then with a gem, and then make them independent operators. This guy you really can't. I mean, you could do Power of the Spheres or something, but probably not. But both of your kind of core communion mage, that because the Astropologist can be both, but both of these guys are old. The other guys, I think these are your only old guys. Yeah, the Master of Names isn't old. This guy isn't old. The Eparch's old. And the Staretza's old. But the Staretza's cap only. So anyway, the Alchemist, old. He's also an actual alchemist. So he's very good at casting like the alchemy ritual where you can turn fire gems or earth gems into gold. Specifically, if you buff his or jump his fire paths up. So if you put on the fire hat, if you put on a robe of the Magi, if you put on a ring of wizardry and you do the fire death booster, you can get +4 in fire. And then presumably, if you also got the Staff of Elemental Mastery, you could do +5. And that would put you all the way up to 6 total. And at that point, you get very strong castings of basically alchemy. And you could potentially run a little ring where you alchemize other people's gems for them and make a bit of profit yourself. But that's going to take a bunch of gear to get there. But it's something worth thinking about. And then also, if you have a bunch of income and you want to turn it into gold, you can do that. A bunch of gem income, fire or earth. So that is the Alchemist. The other thing that's maybe worth mentioning is I do think it's cheaper most of the time to turn earth gems into gold and then build your forts than it is to do something like Wizard Tower. So if you're looking to fort up too, turning earth gems into gold and then making forts is probably a way to do it too. All right, and then we've already talked about the Master of Names. Oh, we didn't really finish talking about it. I told you could jump them into communions and all of that. So yeah, the fire and air ones, you can jump them in communions, and great, they're kind of like a little air mage, or a little fire mage, great. The blood ones are actually kind of special, because these are going to be some of your best Send Lesser Horror casters, which is a pretty important spell for any nation that has access to it. So that's one of the things, keep an eye out. Don't lose your Astral Blood guys. They're pretty useful for that. They're going to be able to do it with less gear than like your occultists. And with that, we're going to come back and talk about the Five-fold Angel in a bit. I want to talk about the Staretza. And the Staretza is pretty important. On one hand, it has all the same paths of all the other mages we've already talked about. So it's like, wait, what? Why do we want this? And you're like, oh, but some of them are higher. Like it gets Fire 2 instead of Fire 1. Hooray! You can already get arbitrarily high levels of magic in communions. So why does it even matter? Why would we pay more for it? And there are some answers. One is for forging and rituals, you need some high level magic. Fire 2, this is the highest you're going to get in fire. Air 2 is not terribly special, except that it's air 2 and blood, so you can potentially use this to summon storm demons or infernal tempest as the game goes on. And then potentially the air 2s you can use to make a robe of the Magi, which is a really important magic booster. If you get access to it, it's still hard to get access to even with Bogarus. And finally, we have the death one too. And you might be like, okay, death, that's not important. We already get the occultist, it's just death 1. Actually, it's kind of important, because it's going to give you Fire Death, which lets you make the Fire Death booster, and it is your only national access to Air Death, which you can tie into a communion, or you can just do Power of the Spheres and hold a Skull Staff, and all of a sudden you're going to be Death 3, Air 1, which is what you need to do Wailing Winds and Wind of Death. Though, be very cautious Wind of Deathing yourself if you're old. But yeah, so the death ones are super important. I would actually recommend probably twice-borning most of the death ones. They're that important. And you probably are going to want about as many of these guys as you can get. They're actually very good, even though they don't look very special. They're really good. The blood ones are actually... So blood and astral, let's talk about them. So Astral is great because you start off Astral 3. It's going to be your highest Astral Mage. It means you can do things like Mind Hunt and stuff with very little gear. All the Blood and Astral ones are going to be able to do Send Lesser Horror, which is down here in Blood 5. You need to be Astral 3, Blood 2. And so if you recall, the Mage is Astral 2, Blood 1. So if you get a random blood path, then all you have to do is put on a Starshine Skullcap and you can cast it. If you're Astral 3, all you have to do is put on a Bloodthorn and you can cast it. So these guys, the Astral and the Blood randoms are going to be your easiest way to cast Send Lesser Horror, which is a very worthy job for one of these units. There's a few other things, and I honestly, we're going to figure out some more uses for them in the game, but like one of the things that's a little fidgety that we could do is we can put on like, so this is actually kind of an idea of not from Arco, but stealing it from him. We can do Sulfur Haze by doing the Flame Focus staff on these guys, and basically it's your only fire air cross path, which usually is not a very important cross path, except for Sulfur Haze. It's pretty good there. So anyway, that's something we can use all of these guys for, is they can all do it. They can all do Phoenix Power. They could honestly all do Power of the Spheres and Phoenix Power, and then they would be like a really big Sulfur Haze caster, which would be, it's only down here, right? But it scales reasonably well. The fatigue cost is going to go down a ton to like, divide by 3, so 7 or 8 fatigue, and then it's going to be area of effect. Was it take 2? Yeah, so it'll be +2, so it's going to be area of effect 6. And the fatigue damage will go up from the heat stun. So yeah, it's a pretty strong spell. So that's something we could potentially do, depending on the matchup. But yeah, the Staretza are quite nice. The Mind Hunts I already mentioned. Yeah, the Horror Summoning is really good. The air death stuff is maybe even the most important part. Yeah, I think these guys are pretty solid. You can also potentially, if you twice born these guys and you turn them into a white mage, they have really good paths. They could potentially thug. And because they're Astral 2, they can be magic phase thugs, which is something to think about. Because you don't really look at Bogarus and you don't think, oh, they're magic phase thugs. But with these paths on a white mage, they probably could. You'd have to figure out, based on the research and all what you would do. Because, they don't have great protection and they don't have Earth or Nature, which are kind of the protection paths. But, they have some death and they have Astral, so they could do, Power of the Spheres and then Invulnerability with the Death Gem and then Phoenix Pyre and Soul Vortex and other things. So they actually can do a bunch of kind of things you wouldn't even think as thugs. So these guys are super important. The Death ones, in my opinion, even though you look at it and you don't think like, oh, Death 1, that's important. Very important, right? These are some of the most important cross paths. These are very important too. Just Astral Blood, very important, because this is going to be your horror engines. And the air, not very special, but kind of nice. Air 2 mages are good. And, yeah, they're going to be, the one of them will be able to do your Robe of the Magi later, once you have all the boosters. But those, they can also do the other things all these guys can do, which is jump in Communions or do Sulfur Haze or summon air elementals or what have you. Or just research. They have a research bonus, so they're pretty good researchers too. But yeah, that's the Staretza. The last unit we need to talk about is the Five-fold Angel. And the Five-fold Angel is kind of weird. It's stealthy. The idea is it would be like the better of the units to lead around the Callisti. And yeah, they're Blood 2. They have damage reversal. There's actually a few uses for these guys, I think. One is they're assassins potentially, and that they, they could potentially be blood assassins. You could give them a black heart, and then we're playing with my thematic Gem Chin, so you could give them the blood slave item, and they can cast life for a life. Okay, this is the funny thing. They're missing arms. They have stumps. They have cut off their arms, and they have torn skin off their back and tied it to wooden stakes, and that's why they look like an angel. They're trying to purify themselves through pain. So yeah, it's some kind of morbid stuff. But yeah, we can't actually wear a bloodthorn. So yeah, maybe it would actually be harder to do the life for a life thing. But yeah, they can do leech or something or summon imps. So anyway, there's a bunch of different things you could do with these guys as assassins. They're also spies, which is important. So you can go, they're holy mage spies. So they actually can get you all the score graphs for a nation. So you get a little bit of construction, you make some bonus stealth items, you send these guys to an enemy capital, and you can sit there and try to get their score graphs. So that can be kind of good. I can't, what's their stealth numbers? 50? Yeah. So you probably want to put some on it, because if you're going to sit there, it's kind of going to piss people off too, because it's going to cause a bit of unrest. And, yeah, people may not be super happy about it, but what are you going to do? It's probably worth it to go get score graphs. And once you have it, I would suggest you move them off the capital, and go maybe scout somebody else out and then come back later and get their graphs again. Because it's a little rude to have a 5 unrest guy parked on somebody's capital, especially if you're friendly with them. But yeah, they're stealthy. You could potentially even raid with them if you had lifelong protection on them, and a few blood slaves to summon imps, and then maybe some Callisti in front to catch arrows or something. I don't know. They're not great, but they potentially have uses. The other thing is they have damage reversal, so again, that can be a kind of useful trait in an assassination battle. I don't know. There's other kind of weird things I thought about using these guys for, like basically just because of the damage reversal tag, using them as like linebacker communions, which I still think is possible. I've actually tested it. I guess that's a whole nother thing. That is something we can do better than almost any nation, is we can do stupid little linebacker communions, which are like impossible to kill. It's actually a little dumb. So that's something, and you don't need Five-fold angels to do it. All of your guys can do it, but you can get almost every buff in the game on your communion slaves and then peace out and then let the army try to kill them, and good luck to them. And so that can actually be a surprising way to deal with raiders, is like, and I'm talking like super small, like 7 mages, and you have 4 slaves. So that's not super small, but pretty small. That could potentially repel pretty medium-sized armies. With enough mage support, especially like soul slay and stuff, it's not going to work. But anyway, it's actually way stronger than you would think. So I think we've been through it. Let's summarize now. This is a nation where you have challenges to solve. Your challenges to solve are, how are you going to deal with kind of having not great troops, and you need to transition away from them. And usually you're going to do that through blood magic, but you can do that through other kinds of summons. You are also a nation that is going to have really good research, and is going to potentially, it can go in a lot of different directions. And for you to decide which direction you're going to research in, and to align that with which mages you're primarily producing, based on which neighbors you have, I think is like probably the foremost challenge of Bogarus. And then deciding when and how much to shift into blood is probably another important decision to make. And by the way, when you shift into blood, you can be doing a lot of things with it, right? You can be getting some assassin game going, like I was talking about with like the Staretza, or you can actually do it on the Scopets too. Or you can get a bunch of summons like Fiends of Darkness, and then Storm Demons. You could get some remote assassination game going, though it's pretty it's pretty expensive to set up with Infernal Disease. Anyway, there's a bunch of different things you can choose to spend your blood slaves on. I think at some point you're going to want to have primarily demon armies, maybe backed up with some kind of siege chaff of your choosing. But yeah, that's one of the challenges, like how do you shift away from the crappy human troops? Because at some point in the mid-game, when like Fog Warriors and stuff comes out, you're going to be feeling pretty sad with what you've got. and like other things too, like air elementals are really good against human nations without magic weapons. It's a little annoying. So by the late game, you'll have tools to deal with all of that, but in the early game, it's going to be a bit tricky. And like I said, there's actually a pretty deep bag of tool. I think there's a nation with a very high skill cap too, because you can use so many different little weird fidgety things you've learned from, playing Dominions for years on other nations. Like, I mentioned the horror, like the super horror bombs that I was talking about. You can do that. You can do the linebacker communions, which are going to be really strong. We can do point buffing on a lot of our dudes. We can do weird little fidgety things, trying to thug with guys that should never thug because they have way too many buffs on them. We can just use our mages well and really powerful communions that we can do almost as powerful a communions as any nation can do. Yeah, there's just so many different things we can do, and then it's a question of like, what should we do, or what are we going to do? So anyway, that's one of the things. The other thing too is like deciding about Firebirds, and I don't know how much of a target that will paint on your back if you start going really heavy into them, but controlling Eternal Pyre is kind of the ticket for getting Firebirds, and I have a plan. I think I can't remember if I have another video on Pretender design. If there is, I guess you'll get to watch that and hear me muse about different other things too. And I think I do a play testing. But anyway, we'll talk about what Pretender we actually use here too, and there's a chance there'll be like a repeat in the next episode. But the Pretender we're going to use actually is this. I'm going to use the Great Enchantress. When she comes out, she's going to be imprisoned. She'll give me a Pearl a turn, which will be great. And we're just going to do Arcane Finesse because we're going to be doing Smite Spam early, and we'll do MR1, and we're going to do Arcane Command. And we're only going to do Dominion 2. You actually need Dominion 2 if you want to ever get 2 Eparchs a turn, which is why we get it. Bet you've never heard that before. You should get 2 candles so that you can spend all 2 candles on getting 2 holy points for cap-only priests. But here we're doing it. I went cold 3. Looking back on it, I kind of almost wish I took like a few more magic paths on my god, and I went heat 1 so that I don't have to worry about murdering Winter. But a cold 3, we have what is it, a cold 2 preference? Yeah, we have a cold 2 preference. This is almost like a free scale, so it's really hard to not take it. And the income penalty you get from going heat is very significant. So I'm not actually sure what's best, but anyway. And you can protect yourself from murdering Winter, by the way, with domes, and you probably should. So, and you don't want to put all your Firebirds in one province. Anyway. And then we take perfect scales, just about. I think we had to dump 1, and I think we dump 1 of order. And then we're going to get a few magic paths. We're going to get these. And basically the reason for these is not these. I want Rune Smashers, so we need to take this pretty rare cross path. Otherwise, we'd have to empower 4. This will allow us to break into water, because actually water is probably one of the easiest things to break into. We can make a Ring of Wizardry, and then we can make a Water Bracelet, and now we can make a Robe of the Sea, and now all of a sudden we're water 4, so we can summon something and then give them all these items, and we're arbitrarily high water, so break into water. And the death here is mostly for being able to twice-born my god, so I can use them in combat if I want to. Because an Astral 6 unit is going to be very useful in combat in the late mid-game. However, that is not the main reason for this god. The main reason I got this god is because we're not going to get a ton of things on our god because I want to have mostly scales. And with High Astral, I can fix any particular magic diversity issue I haven't been able to fix so far by wishing for a special unit. And furthermore, I can wish for gems and turn all of my gems into, like, one of the things about wishing, like, you don't, unless you have like an alteration discount site, you're not going to be making a profit. However, just wishing for gems every turn will allow you to freely exchange gem types over the course of several turns without having like an alchemy penalty. And that's actually really useful in and of itself. And particularly on this nation, I think what I'm going to do, but I don't know, we'll do it. We'll do whatever we think is optimal at the time, is we will be alchemizing, not alchemizing, we'll be wishing for gems, and we'll be pulling all the fire out and probably re-alchemizing everything back into astral and then casting it again, where we'll effectively be turning our other gem types into fire gems at a very efficient ratio. And then we can use that to make Firebirds, and our Firebirds are not going to be very good at giving us fire gems back, but they're going to be pretty okay with these scales at giving us all these other gem types back. Oh, did I? You know what I did? I think I went 3 here and I went 2 here. Probably should have dumped this and taken this, but we'll see. Maybe I can get a throne or something that'll get me up to Magic 3. So anyway, that is the build. I want to spend a little bit of time talking. We're really long on the video, but I'm talking a little bit about why each of the scales are important for Bogarus, and why if you're going to go full scales, not getting all of them may be a problem. And by the way, don't think you have to do this. This is my build. This is my opinion on it. This is how I'm going to play it. You can do an expander. I don't think you need an expander. You can do a Titan. Titan could be really nice to have for your first war. You could also just get more paths on your Imprison so that when they wake up, you're going to fill up a few more holes you have in your nation. Or, you know, like I was saying, you could do that thing where you try and get Eternal Pyre early. Anyway, basically, we have, if you get, to max Malia Druzina production, you're going to want to max productivity. The other thing to note about Malia Druzina, that's going to help you. Productivity is especially helpful for starting expansionist scales, because at the beginning, you're always resource constrained. And as you free up your cap circle and get more resources, that will no longer be quite the case. However, these guys also cost a lot of recruitment points. And if you max productivity, like a lot of the Bogarus guides I've seen out there, they're like, oh, you can dump order. Here's the thing. If you max productivity, you are going to be recruitment point constrained. I mean, look, this build, once I clear my cap circle with this, and I'm order 3, productivity 3, and I'm maxing out Malia Druzina in my cap, what do you think I'm running out of? Do you think I'm running out of recruitment points, or do you think I'm running out of resources? I'm running out of recruitment points, not out of resources. So not taking order will heavily limit the number of Malia Druzina you're able to get out for the first war, which, if you want to be ready to fight, like I do, like I don't want to be the Bogarus rush target. I want to be the Bogarus that's ready to get dirty and fight. It matters whether you're getting 5 or 8 Malia Druzina out of your cap every turn. So that's one of the things. It's also just more money. We've already talked about temperature a bit. Productivity, I think, I didn't really talk much about it, but I think it's a no-brainer. If you're doing scales expansion with most nations, you're going to need productivity. Growth, this is the best long-term income scale in the game. I think if you go a scales build and you don't take growth, you've got some big problems. Because the idea is we should scale into the game pretty well with these scales. Luck 3. Now, normally this might be a dump scale if you're going to go for if you're going to go for a scales build. However, on Bogarus, it's especially important. Not only is it just really nice and fun playing a game where you don't dread logging into your turn to see what bad event happened, and actually getting good events, and some of them can be game-changing good events, you know, like you can get a Ring of the Wizardry, or Robe of the Magi, or whatever, some artifact that's really important. So not only is that super-duper nice, but in addition, you have Firebirds. And the Firebirds, the way the events work, I had said it was independent of the game events. So like you can have up to 5 game events, and then you're going to have in addition to that the Firebird events. The Firebird events are still tied to the scales in that province. So whenever you get that 2% chance that pops up that says, hey, we're going to have an event. And by the way, you can have multiple events in the same province from Firebirds. Once that rolls and it says, okay, we're having a good event. And by the way, when the Firebird event happens, it's always a good event. What the game is going to do is it's going to take a list of all of the possible good events that could generate in that province based on your scales. And then it will draw from that. So if you have scales that generate better events, then your Firebird stuff will be better. And Luck 3 is the best thing for getting better events. And in particular, Luck and Magic is going to give you a lot of gems, which is nice. You get a few more gems if you take Magic 3. So I don't know if we'll be able to fix that, but maybe. But that's a reason to take this. Now, why would you want to take Magic? Because maybe this is finally our dump scale. First of all, you can dump Magic with Bogarus, because usually nations where you can dump, where you can go drain, are either nations where you're going to have a lot of potentially research boost items, which we certainly could have, because we can make quills, and we can make the imps. If we can find our way to a skull staff, we could also make skull mentors. And once we get construction 6, we can make lightless lanterns. So we can make basically all of the research boosters. So that's one reason to take it. Another reason to take drain is because you have these guys who are phenomenal researchers. So like in Magic 3, these guys are researching 20 a turn. In Drain 3, they're researching 14 a turn. Is that different? Yes, but it's not that different. Like, the higher up your RP is on the mages that you're using to research, the less magic scales matter, right? So if you go drain, you want to make a lot more Master of Names. One of the problems of doing that, though, is it makes you probably make more Master of Names than you should, because your other mages are going to be better in combat. Not like Master of Mages are horrible in combat, but you have other mages who are better. But you can totally go drain. The reasons I think you may not want to, though, are one, is we're an astral nation, so we have a lot of MR negate stuff, like we can soul slay people, we can mind hunt people, we can later in the game master enslave people, all of those things. It's nice for them to have the -1 debuff from MR instead of the +1 MR from drain. Furthermore, there's another reason, which is horrors in our Dominion. A lot of horrors get magic power, basically, so that they're going to get +1 strength, attack, and defense for every magic scale, and they're going to lose that in drain. So send lesser horror is going to be a lot more effective if we're casting it in our land, like if we're trying to catch raiders or something. If we do it in magic scales, like ideally Magic 3. I think looking back on this, this would be a little more greedy, because this one extra order scale is going to be a little better earlier than the one magic scale. But if I did it again, I would probably take Magic 3. This will mean you have a bit less armies and stuff to fight for your first war. And especially when you're recruiting like indie crossbows and stuff, it's really nice having the order. So, ideally you would have them both, but you can see we can't quite afford it. You could go down one and only get like the minor magic resistance. The problem if we go down one, and then I think we can afford both. Yeah, the problem of doing this is that to make the ring, to cast Wish, let's look at the chassis. To cast Wish, we need to be Astral 9. And we've got the hat, we've got these 2 slots. That would get us from 5 all the way up to 8. We needed 1 more. And the only other one to get, well, there's 2 more to get. You could either do the Dimensional Rod here, which is an artifact that's going to drive you insane. Not really something you're looking to put on your god. Or you can do the Robe of the Magi, which is heavily tainted and will get your god very horror marked. Now, in general, when you're doing like scaling up wish casters, which we probably won't do, I have no idea, maybe we will, you're going to have to use the Robe of the Magi unless you want to empower. So that's kind of a thing. However, I don't really want that on my god. And we would either have to empower my god or, do something else I don't want to do if she's only Astral 5. So getting her up to 6 just makes it pretty trivial to cast Wish. That's the idea. And I would rather sack a scale so that I can do that easily. So I think this is the build we end up going with. Let's double check real quick. I named my god Rasputin, who is going to be the leader of the Rusian people in the late Imperial Age. And by the way, Grippa is my buddy in this. We're doing a Hydra game, so we're having 2 people play. I probably should have mentioned that at the start of the video, but for me, I just kind of have assumed you guys all knew it because I've been recording videos for this series for a few weeks. But I've just come back to redo this. But yeah, I think this is basically the build we did. Pretty happy with it. And anyway, there's probably a bunch of other stuff you can do. Don't let anybody steal your dreams or tell you what you should or shouldn't do. Here's the Blood Vengeance build. Bunch of other weird things. Yeah, I don't know. You can do a bunch of different things. This was me trying to do Twist Fate Chillar, see if I could put people to sleep before they killed the Callisti. Recuperation, probably not very good, but you are a Mind Hunt nation, so you could kind of make some use of it, and it gives you an option to do tarts and stuff if you want to. I don't really love tarts that much. Anyway, guys, I hope you have enjoyed it, and I hope you're stoked for the series, and I will see you all next time.